Hi, I'm Noelle, and welcome back to the Passport to Possibility podcast. If you're new here, this podcast is about what can happen when you start looking at your life a little differently, whether that means travel, starting over, trying something new, building something of your own, or simply realizing there may still be more ahead than you thought. And today, I want to talk about something I think a lot of people feel, but don't always know how to put into words. What happens when you know you want something different, but you don't actually know what different is yet? Maybe you've thought about changing jobs. Maybe you've wondered about starting a business. Maybe you've looked at something online and thought, I wonder if I could do that. Or maybe you just know you want more options than you have right now. In this episode, I want to talk about why I don't think you need the whole plan before you start looking, why curiosity matters more than certainty in the beginning, and why sometimes what we call a no is really fear making the decision before we've learned enough to decide for ourselves. Because I think that's where a lot of us get stuck. We think we're supposed to know exactly what we want before we're allowed to explore anything new. And I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes you know something needs to change before you know what the answer is. You might not hate your job, you might not be miserable, you may have a perfectly decent life. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you start asking different questions. Do I really want to keep doing this for another 10 years? Do I want another source of income? Could I learn something completely different? Is there another option I haven't considered yet? And those questions can feel uncomfortable because once you start asking them, your brain immediately wants answers. We want to know where it's going to lead. We want to know whether it will work. We want to know whether we'll be good at it. We want to know whether it's worth the time, the money, or the effort. But that's not really how most new things begin. Most of the time, they begin with curiosity. That was certainly true for me. I spent more than 3 decades in healthcare administration. I knew that world. I understood the work. I knew what I was good at, and there's a certain comfort that comes with knowing how things work. So when I started looking at something completely different, I didn't suddenly have this big polished plan. I wasn't sitting there thinking, I'm going to become an entrepreneur and build a whole new direction for myself. I was curious. I wanted to understand what it was. I wanted to know how it worked. I wanted to know whether it was something I could actually learn. And I think that's an important distinction because curiosity does not require commitment. Looking at something doesn't mean you have to do it. Asking questions doesn't mean you've said yes. Learning about a business doesn't mean you have to start one. It just means you're giving yourself enough information to make a real decision. And I think we skip that part sometimes. We see something that interests us, and for a minute, possibility feels exciting. Then the fear shows up. What if I'm not good at it? What if I waste my time? What if I spend money and it doesn't work? What are people going to think? What if I'm too old to start something completely new? And then sometimes we back away and tell ourselves, we decided against it. But did we? Or did we get uncomfortable before we ever really understood what we were looking at? That's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, because a real no is completely okay. Not every business is right for every person. Not every opportunity is going to fit your life. Not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I do think there's a difference between saying no after you've looked closely and saying no because fear got loud before you ever gave yourself the chance to understand it. For me, one of the possibilities I eventually explored was building a business connected to travel. And what surprised me was how much of it had nothing to do with already being an expert in travel. There were things I absolutely had to learn, systems, suppliers, marketing, content, leadership, different ways of communicating with people. But I also started recognizing how much of what I already knew still mattered. I knew how to stay organized. I knew how to communicate. I knew how to solve problems. I knew how to learn new systems. I knew how to follow through. Those skills didn't disappear just because I stepped into something unfamiliar. And I think we underestimate that. Starting something new does not mean starting with nothing. You bring your experience with you. Then you add new skills. And yes, some of those skills can feel uncomfortable at first. Talking on camera was, uncomfortable for me in the beginning. Creating content was new, or different types of content was new to me. Learning more about marketing was new. Thinking like a business owner instead of an employee was new. Leadership is something I'm still continuing to develop, but that's also one of the things I've come to appreciate about entrepreneurship. It asks you to grow. You don't just get to want the result. You have to learn how to do the work. You have to get better at things. You have to be willing to be a beginner sometimes. And I actually think there's something really positive in that. Now, I also want to be clear about something. I don't believe entrepreneurship is some magical answer to everything. It isn't easy money. It isn't guaranteed income. And it definitely doesn't mean you never have to work again. But for some people, it can be another option. And right now, I think people are looking for options. The cost of living is high. Groceries are expensive. Housing is expensive. Families have responsibilities. People are thinking about retirement differently than they may have 10 or 20 years ago. And sometimes what people want isn't necessarily to quit everything they're doing. Sometimes they just want another possibility, another way to learn, another way to earn, another direction they could build alongside the life they already have. That's one of the reasons I think it's worth looking at things you may not have considered before. Not because every one of them will be right for you, but because you don't know what fits until you understand what exists. We live in a very different world than the one many of us entered the workforce in. There are ways to work, create, learn, market, connect, and build businesses now that simply weren't available to us years ago. And I think that means we owe ourselves a little curiosity. Maybe there's something you've been watching from the sidelines. Maybe it's a business. Maybe it's something creative. Maybe it's going back to school. Maybe it's learning a new skill. Maybe it's doing something online that you would never have imagined yourself doing 5 years ago. You do not have to know exactly where it will lead before you start learning about it. You don't need the 5-year plan. You don't need every answer. You don't even need to know whether the answer is going to be yes. Sometimes the next step is simply asking better questions. What is this really? How does this work? What would it require from me? What would I have to learn? Does this fit the life I actually want? And then you get to decide. That's the part I think that matters most. You get to decide, not fear. Not somebody else's opinion, not the voice in your head telling you you're too old, too late, or not qualified enough. You. And if the answer is no after you've really looked, that's a decision. But if there's something you've been curious about and you've never actually allowed yourself to investigate it, maybe that's worth paying attention to. So that's what I want to leave you with today. You don't need the whole plan to start looking. You just need enough curiosity to take the next step and enough trust in yourself to make the decision once you have the information. And if this episode brought something to mind for you, a business, a new direction, a skill, or simply something you've been quietly curious about, ask yourself this: have I actually decided this isn't for me, or have I never really given myself the chance to find out? You don't have to have the answer today. Maybe you just start looking. Thanks for spending time with me today. And remember, your story isn't finished yet. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend or share it on social media and tag me. Just search for Mini Travel Adventures for Us. That's Mini Travel Adventures, the number 4, US, so I can personally thank you and hear which episodes you're enjoying. I'll talk to you next Wednesday.